She left in November, and I did not notice until December. That is the most honest thing I have ever said about myself, and I have been turning it over in my hands like a stone ever since, cool on one side, sharp on the other, trying to decide whether a man who admits such a thing has earned the right to tell what came after. I have decided he has not. He tells it anyway, because it is the only accounting he has left to give. My name is Callum Ashford. I am the 8th Duke of Ravenshallow, a title that has meant, in practical terms, that people step back when I enter a room and speak more carefully than they otherwise might. I had taken a certain comfort in this. It felt like order. It felt, if I am being fully honest, like safety. The particular safety of a man who learned early that warmth costs something, and who thereafter kept his warmth in a locked cabinet, producing it on state occasions, and locking it away again before anyone could see he had it. I mention this so that what follows is legible. For 2 seasons, 2 full London seasons, from the cherry blossoms on the park to the autumn fogs, Viola Marsh had sat at the edges of rooms I occupied, and I had registered her the way I registered the furniture. As part of the arrangement, useful, undemanding, and not requiring my particular attention. She was a paid companion to Lady Eustace Pemford, the Dowager Countess of Chettering, an old woman I respected, a sharp woman, a woman who had known my mother before my mother died and who therefore received invitations to Ravenshallow that I gave to very few. Where Lady Pemford went, Viola Marsh went. That was the arrangement. It did not, for the longest time, strike me as an arrangement worth examining. She was not plain. I want to set that aside immediately, because it would be comfortable, a kind of excuse, to say I had overlooked her because she was unremarkable to the eye. She was not. She had a face that was quiet in the way a still pond is quiet. You had to stop moving yourself before you could see what was in it. Her hair was dark and kept simply, because her station did not call for elaborate arrangement, and she wore gowns that were clean and correct, and without the small vanities that the season demanded of women who wished to be seen. She did not wish to be seen, or rather, and I understand this now in a way I did not then, she had stopped caring whether she was seen, which is a different thing entirely and considerably more unsettling when you finally recognize it. I dismissed her, not in a single dramatic incident, not in the way the stories go, with a cruel remark at the center of a gasping room. I dismissed her the way a man dismisses furniture, with absence, with the ordinary machinery of inattention. I spoke across her at dinner. I failed to learn her name until well into the first season, and even then I held it at a slight remove, as though to know it fully would imply an obligation I had not chosen. When she offered an observation, and she did, occasionally, in a voice that was low and unhurried and did not demand to be heard, I received it as one receives a dispatch from a province one has no particular interest in visiting. I was, in short, a man who had learned so thoroughly to protect himself from the cost of warmth that he could sit across from warmth for 2 seasons and call it furniture. The evening she left, we were at Marchline House. Lord and Lady Marchline kept a good table, better wine than their conversation warranted, and the dinner was the sort that stretches past the point of enjoyment into the territory of obligation. I was seated near the head. Lady Pemford was further down, and Viola was beside her, as always, filling the old woman's glass when it needed filling, leaning occasionally to hear what she said, and otherwise doing exactly nothing that would have required me to notice her. I did not notice her leave. I know now because I asked later, the way a man asks about a fire after his house has burned down, that she set down her glass, folded her napkin precisely, and said something quiet to Lady Pemford. Lady Pemford patted her hand. Viola stood. She said good evening to the hostess, who was not watching. She walked out of Marchline House at 9:30 in the evening, and did not attend another gathering in my sphere for the remainder of the season, and then the season was over, and she was gone entirely. I did not notice until December. December at Ravenshallow is a specific kind of silence. The moors go gray and the light fails early, and the house, which is large, which I have always called proportionate, and my steward has always called unnecessarily so, closes in around its inhabitants the way a cathedral closes in around the faithful, which is to say, you are reminded of how small you are, and how vast everything else. I had come north for the shooting. I had brought 2 friends, Aldous Merton, who had been my friend since school and who hunted badly but drank well, and Sir Thomas Fenwick, who hunted superbly and had the conversational range of a weather vane. It was a satisfactory arrangement. We shot in the mornings, ate too much at dinner, and in the evenings I sat by the fire in the library and read while they played cards in the parlor and occasionally called through to tell me I was an antisocial relic. It was during one of these evenings, the fire settled, the book open, Aldous calling something through the door that I did not register, that I understood without quite meaning to, that Ravenshallow did not feel like a house anyone lived in. This is a difficult thing to describe. I had lived here all my life. I had grown up in these rooms. I knew the sound of every settle in the floorboards and the precise moment the library fire needed banking, and the way the north-facing drawing room held the cold an extra hour past morning. I knew the house, but knowing a house and inhabiting it are different things, and sitting there in December with the fire and the book and Aldous and Thomas cheerfully existing in the next room, I felt with sudden clarity that the house was empty. Not of people, of something else. I set down the book. I thought without knowing why I thought it. She used to say something to the old woman, something low, before she stood to leave. I had not, until that moment, realized I had noticed this. I had noticed it. I had stored it, apparently, without permission, the way the mind stores things it is not yet ready to use. She would lean toward Lady Pemford, and Lady Pemford would nod, and then Viola would stand in that way she had of standing, which was not dramatic, which was simply a person removing herself from a space. And what? I could not finish the image because I had never looked at it directly. I had only caught it at the corner of my vision, season after season, the way you catch the last light of an evening without turning toward it. I went to bed. I told myself nothing in particular was wrong. The snow came in January. By February, I had written 3 letters and burned them. The trouble with being a man who has kept his warmth in a locked cabinet is that when the cabinet is finally broken open, you have no idea what to do with the warmth. It has been in the dark too long. It does not behave like warmth should. It behaves like panic, like urgency without direction, and because you have never practiced the vocabulary of it, it comes out wrong. I tried first the machinery of information. I sent a note to Aldous, who knew everyone, asking after Lady Pemford. Lady Pemford, Aldous replied, had gone to Bath for the waters, as she did every February, and was apparently in excellent health. Her companion, he added, and I could hear in the careless addition the beginning of a question he was polite enough not to ask, had not, he believed, gone with her this year. There had been, he gathered, some change of circumstance. Change of circumstance. I sat with this for a long time. I then, with what I can only describe as the excessive caution of a man dismantling something he is not sure he has the right to touch, wrote to Lady Pemford herself. An inquiry after her health, genuine. She was a woman I respected, and, appended with studied casualness at the end, a mention that I had not seen Miss Marsh at recent gatherings and hoped all was well. Lady Pemford's reply arrived 11 days later. It was 2 pages of Bath gossip and a single sentence near the end. Viola has gone to her cousin in Derbyshire. She is, I believe, extremely well. She always was. The last sentence sat on the page like a verdict. She always was. I understood, reading that Lady Pemford knew exactly what she was saying, and exactly who she was saying it to. The old woman had known my mother. She had watched me across 20-odd dinner tables. She had, I now suspected, watched me not watching Viola Marsh for 2 entire seasons, and the 3 words she chose at the end of her letter, "She always was," were an indictment as precise as anything I had ever received across a courtroom floor. I put the letter in my desk. I took it out again. I thought about Derbyshire. I want to record here, because it matters to the accounting, what I understood by March. I understood that I had been comfortable for 11 years, with the absence of anything that required me. My wife had died, Emmeline, who was kind, who deserved better than the man I had been at 26, and who died at 29 of a fever that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the malice of chance. And I had responded to this by becoming, very gradually, a house in which no one particularly lived. I had maintained the estate. I had attended the obligations. I had kept the cabinet locked because it seemed, at the time, the only way to ensure that the cost of warmth did not exceed what I could bear to spend. And then, in the space of a December evening when I could not finish a memory of a woman standing up from a dinner table, the cabinet had been forced open, not by anything she did but by her simple absence, which was the final irony. She had not tried to reach me. She had not been angling for my attention or waiting to be noticed. She had simply been sitting at the edge of rooms, filling a glass, offering a low-voiced observation, existing with a completeness that had nothing to do with whether I saw her. And then she had stood up and left, without drama, without a scene, without a single backward glance that I had seen. And the house in which I had been comfortable for 11 years had revealed itself to be exactly what it was. I booked passage for Derbyshire in April. The cousin's name was Mrs. Hartley, a widow, I was told, who kept a comfortable cottage near Bakewell and who received enough income from a late husband's trade interests to live quietly and independently, and to accommodate a cousin who had lately found herself between positions. The cottage was called Fieldgate. It sat on a lane that became mud in April, which my coachman informed me at length as we made our way along it. I did not send word ahead. This was, I now understand, either the most honest thing I did or the most presumptuous, depending on how you look at it. I did not send word because I was not certain she would receive me if I did, and I could not blame her if she didn't, and I was not, at 41, above the suspicion that I had forfeited the right to announcement. So I arrived unannounced on a Tuesday morning in April with the mud on the wheels and the lane behind me and the cottage ahead, which was small and well kept, and had kitchen garden beds beginning to show green along the south wall. She was in the kitchen garden. I had not planned for this. I had constructed, over the coach journey, a reasonably dignified approach. I would be received in the parlor. There would be some brief social architecture to establish the visit's legitimacy, and then I would have the conversation in a setting that gave us both somewhere to look that was not directly at each other. I had not planned to find her crouched beside a bed of early onions with dirt on her gloves and her hair, in a loose, not under a plain working bonnet, entirely absorbed in something that had nothing to do with me. She looked up when I came through the gate. She did not stand immediately. She looked at me the way she had always looked at things, steadily, from under that particular quality of attention that did not rush itself. And I had the distinct sensation of being seen clearly by someone who had already formed an accurate opinion of me, and was now simply checking whether the opinion needed revision. "Your Grace," she said. "Miss Marsh." A pause. She pulled one glove off and regarded her hand, then put the glove back on. I was not expecting a call. "No," I said. "I imagine not." The kitchen garden smelled of turned earth and something green and cold. A wood pigeon was making a noise in the elm at the back wall. My coachman, I was aware, had stopped a respectful distance down the lane and was not, I felt, entirely without curiosity about the scene. "Is Lady Pemford?" "Lady Pemford is well," I said. "I wrote to ask. She is in Bath. This is not a call on Lady Pemford's behalf." She waited. She had always been, I was remembering, someone who did not fill silences unnecessarily. "May I?" I gestured toward the cottage, feeling, for perhaps the first time in a decade, genuinely uncertain of my footing. She studied me for another moment. Then she stood, without particular hurry, and said, "I'll tell Mrs. Hartley we have a visitor for tea." Mrs. Hartley was a cheerful, sharp-eyed woman of 50 who served a good tea and asked no intrusive questions, which I suspected took considerable self-discipline. She found a reason to be elsewhere after 15 minutes, at which point Viola and I were left in a small, warm parlor with a fire that was doing its best against the April cold and 2 cups of tea, and everything that had not yet been said between us. I had the speeches still. I had rehearsed them across 4 days of coach journey. They were careful and well-constructed, and sitting in that parlor with the fire and the tea and Viola Marsh watching me from the chair across with that precise, unhurried attention, I understood that none of them were adequate. They were the speeches of a man managing a situation, and this had stopped being a situation somewhere between December and now. I put the speeches down. "I didn't notice when you left," I said. "The evening at Marchline House. I didn't notice until December." She said nothing. "I want to be exact about it," I said, "because I think you deserve the exact thing, not the managed version. I noticed your absence before I understood what your presence had been. That is not, I understand, a particularly good account of myself." "No," she said evenly. "It isn't." I stopped. The word comfortable came to mind, with all its implications. I had been allowing myself the particular luxury of a man who doesn't have to pay attention. And you were there, at the edge of things, and I received your being there the way I received the curtains and the candelabra. And then you weren't, and I looked at the fire. "I couldn't finish a memory," I said. "That's what happened in December. I was trying to remember you leaving the way you always said something to Lady Pemford before you stood, and I couldn't finish it. I'd never looked at it directly enough to hold the whole thing." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the pigeon had relocated to somewhere closer. Its sound came through the window, low and unremarkable. "You've come all the way to Derbyshire," she said, "to tell me you couldn't finish a memory." "I've come to Derbyshire," I said, "because the house doesn't feel like anywhere a person lives, and I have recently understood why, and I would like to ask, if you're willing to hear it, whether you might consider returning." The word returning hung in the room. "To Lady Pemford's service," she said. Not a question, a clarification. She was watching me in that way that made me understand clearly that there would be no comfortable imprecision allowed. "No," I said. "Not to Lady Pemford's service." I looked at her directly, which was what the moment required. "To mine, to Ravenshallow. I am asking, Miss Marsh, whether you would consider I am asking you to marry me." The fire settled. The pigeon continued in its small, stubborn way outside. She did not say anything for a long time. "You are," she said finally, carefully, "asking the woman you treated as furniture for 2 seasons to marry you." "Yes." "On the basis that your house feels empty." "On the basis," I said, "that I spent 4 months understanding that your being in a room made the room inhabitable, and that I had been too much of a fool, too carefully defended against the cost of noticing, to see it until you were gone. That is the honest accounting. I will not dress it up. I understand if you send me back to Northumberland." She looked at her tea. She looked at the fire. She had, I noticed, still not removed the gardening gloves, which she had set on the table beside her chair, one finger turned up and one lying flat. "Your Grace," she said. "Callum," I said. "I would prefer Callum under the circumstances." A breath, almost not quite a smile. "What circumstances are those?" "The circumstances of my sitting in your cousin's parlor in April, having said the most inadequate and honest things I have ever said to anyone." The almost smile became the real thing, small and private, and entirely hers to give or not give. She gave it. I understood in that moment what it had cost her to stop attending those dinners. Not the position, Lady Pemford's affection had been genuine, and her situation comfortable. What it had cost her was the particular small dignity of continuing to sit in a room where she was treated as furniture, and she had paid that cost, and walked away from it, not in anger but in the clean, quiet decision of a person who knows what she is worth and has stopped waiting for someone else to know it. I was the someone else. I would need you to understand, she said, that if you propose to someone, the proposal is only the first sentence. What comes after it is the proof. Yes, I said, I know. And that I am not, she paused, choosing the word precisely, as she chose everything. I am not practiced at being the center of anyone's attention. I spent 2 seasons learning, rather efficiently, to exist without yours. I am not certain I want to unlearn that. You shouldn't unlearn it, I said. I would rather learn to deserve it. She looked at me for a long moment. That, she said, is a better answer than I expected. She did not say yes that Tuesday. This is important, and I include it because the story of proud men and the women who finally reach them tends to end at the proposal, as though the proposal were the whole of it, and it is not. It is the first sentence, as she had said. What comes after is the proof. She said that she needed time to think, and I said that was entirely reasonable, and I stayed at the inn in Bakewell, a decent inn, cleaner than I had expected. And I walked in the mornings along the river and thought about what it meant to be a man who had to prove something after 41 years of not having to prove anything at all. She came to the inn on Thursday. She did not come alone. Mrs. Hartley was with her, sitting in the inn parlor with a cup of tea and a book, providing the necessary architecture of propriety, and Viola and I walked along the river path with a decorous distance between us and the April cold making itself known through our coats. She asked me things. Not the things I had expected, not about my estate or my income or my intentions toward Lady Pemford's circle. She asked me what I did in the evenings at Ravenshallow. She asked me whether I had any friends I liked rather than merely tolerated. She asked me what I had thought about, specifically, in December. I answered her, honestly. I told her about the library fire and the empty quality of the house and Aldous calling through the door. I told her that I had thought about the way she always folded her napkin before she stood. I told her about the 3 letters I had burned. What did they say? She asked. The first one was an account of myself, I said. It was accurate and rather damning. The second was an argument for why you should forgive me, which I burned because it was insufferable. The third was just your name, written several times, which I burned because that seemed even more alarming. She was quiet for a moment. The river made its sound. A sheepdog watched us from a field gate with professional disinterest. I always knew, she said, that you weren't unkind. Not genuinely. Men who are genuinely unkind don't have the particular quality of self-containment you had. Unkind men are usually very busy being unkind. It occupies them. You were simply absent, inside something. 11 years, I said. Yes, she said, I counted. I stopped walking. She stopped a few paces ahead, then turned. The river went on behind her. The light on the water was the particular pale gold of an April morning, before the day has committed to anything. You knew, I said, you saw it. I see most things, she said, with no particular pride in it. It was rather a professional requirement as a companion. You learn to read rooms. You learn to know which silences are comfortable and which ones are a man standing behind a wall. And you sat at the edges of those rooms for 2 seasons, I said, watching me stand behind the wall. And then I stopped, she said simply. Because you'd reached the limit of it. She considered this. Because I decided, she said, that I was tired of being useful at a distance. That if no one was going to see me, fully see me, I would rather be seen in a smaller room than invisible in a large one. The sheepdog had lost interest in us and departed. The April morning continued. I thought about her in the kitchen garden when I came through the gate, crouched beside the onions, absorbed in something that had nothing to do with me and completely herself. "Viola," I said. She raised her eyebrows very slightly. "Will you?" I stopped. I had said this already more carefully in the parlor, but a man gets one managed speech and one true one, and the managed one was spent. "I spent 11 years in a locked house," I said. "You spent 2 seasons in the rooms of it and I couldn't see you. I am asking, I'm not arguing for it, I'm not managing it, I'm asking, would you be willing to let me try? Not to manage the situation, to try." She looked at me for a long time. The river, the pale gold light, the April cold making itself known. "Yes," she said, "I'll let you try." We were married in June, at the village church half a mile from Ravenshallow, in a ceremony that was small and correct, and had no audience that I did not personally wish to be there. Aldous stood up for me and wept in a manner he has consistently denied ever since. Mrs. Hartley came up from Derbyshire. Lady Pemford, who was not well enough to travel, sent a letter that I will not repeat in full, but that contained the phrase, "I told your mother about that girl the first season she attended my table, and your mother, God rest her, would have been insufferably pleased," which I read aloud to Viola in the vestry before the service, and which produced, from my wife, a laugh that I would like to record as the finest thing I had heard in 11 years, or perhaps longer. She wore a gown the color of old lace, and she walked up the aisle at the pace she did everything, steadily, without hurry, in no particular need of the room's attention. And I stood at the front of the church and watched her walk toward me and felt, for the first time in more years than I could precisely count, that I was standing in a room where the air was warm. There is a thing that happens, I have since learned, when a house you have lived in all your life becomes a house someone else also lives in. It does not happen all at once. It happens in the accumulation of small things, the way the kitchen garden came in small things, an onion first, then a row, then a green and fragrant hole. A second candle lit on the writing table in the library. The sound of a voice in the corridor when I was not expecting it, low and unhurried and not performing itself. Books left open at angles I would not have chosen. An opinion offered at breakfast, not asking to be received, simply offered, the way she had always offered things. As something placed on the table, available to be taken or left, indifferent to whether it was valued. I took everything. I want to say this plainly. I took everything she offered, and I was careful with it in a way I had not been careful with things before, because I understood, with the absolute clarity of a man who burned 3 letters and spent 4 days in an April coach, and stood in a kitchen garden with mud on his boots waiting to be evaluated, what I had nearly lost. And I knew, more importantly, what she had already demonstrated she was capable of, walking away, setting down the glass, folding the napkin, departing without drama from things that cost her too much to stay in. She never walked away from Ravenshallow. This is not, I understand, something I can take credit for. She chose. Every morning she woke up and walked down to the kitchen garden or into the library or sat by the north window with her embroidery that she would pick up and set down without any urgency. She chose. She continued to be a person who did not need to be seen, in a house where she was seen. I made it a project in that first year to see her. Not to announce that I was seeing her. That would have been, I knew, excessive, and would have made her look up from the embroidery with the slightly raised eyebrow that I had come to understand was her version of patient amusement. But to actually see her, to notice the observation she offered at breakfast and respond to it as though it merited response, which it always did, to ask what she was reading and listen to the answer, to come and find her in the kitchen garden not to summon her, but simply to stand for a while in the same patch of afternoon. She accepted this, and then slowly, the way the house warmed slowly, one candle at a time, she began to offer more. The second season after our marriage, we went to London together. It was the first time I had attended the London season with any genuine interest in attending it. I had previously gone because it was the requirement and left as soon as decency permitted. Viola had attended it previously as a companion, useful, invisible, 3 chairs to my left. We walked into the Ashbourne Ball together in March. I am aware this was not, from the room's perspective, an unremarkable event. The Duke of Ravenshallow's marriage had been noted. His choice of bride had been, I was given to understand, extensively discussed. The room had opinions. These opinions ranged from the charitable, she is said to be very steady and sensible, to the less charitable, a paid companion, and no family of consequence. And they were held by people who had sat at many of the same dinner tables as Viola Marsh for 2 seasons, and had similarly treated her as furniture. I did not do anything theatrical about this. I want to be honest about that. There was no scene, no dramatic intervention, no moment at which I made the room understand they were wrong. What happened was quieter and, I believe, more permanent. I walked into the Ashbourne Ball with my wife's hand on my arm, and I paid attention to her. When someone spoke to me and ignored her, I turned to include her. When she spoke, I listened in the way that makes it clear to any watching room that what is being said is worth hearing. When Lord Carstairs, a man who had spoken across her twice that I now clearly remembered, having spent a winter cataloguing my inattentions, offered some remark across the general conversation that passed over her entirely, I said, I believe my wife had something to say on that point, and turned to Viola, and Viola said the something, which was precise and correct and made Carstairs' own contribution look slightly effortful by comparison. I did not do this to humiliate Lord Carstairs, I should be clear. I did it because she had something to say and the room ought to hear it. That is all. The humiliation, if there was any, was incidental. She said nothing about it that evening. We were in the coach going home. She was looking out at the lamps along the street, thoughtful in that contained way of hers, and I said nothing either, because she had not asked me to do it and did not require my accounting of it. Then she said, still looking at the lamps, "Thank you for that." "It required no particular effort," I said. "You were right and Carstairs wasn't." "That isn't," she said, "actually what I'm thanking you for." I looked at her. She turned from the window. In the lamplit interior of the coach, she had that quality of stillness she always had, and also, and I was still learning this, still finding the edges of it, a warmth she had begun to offer more freely in the months of being known. "I'm thanking you," she said, for doing the thing without making a scene of it. You could have made a scene. You didn't. You just made sure I was heard." "That is what I intend," I said, "to spend the rest of my life doing." She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked back at the lamps. She put her hand on mine in the dark of the coach without ceremony. "Good," she said, "see that you do." The kitchen garden at Ravenshallow is hers now, truly hers, not in the legal sense but in the sense that matters, which is that she has made it say something it never said before. She has extended it south, into what was a patch of gravel I had never known what to do with, and put in a cutting border that has no practical purpose except that she wanted it. In the early mornings in summer, I sometimes find her there before I am fully awake, in the working bonnet she brought from Fieldgate, already absorbed in something that has nothing to do with whether I am watching. I watch anyway. She knows I watch. She has that peripheral awareness she always had, the companion sense of the room, and she knows I am there. She does not make a thing of it. She finishes what she is doing, and then she sets down whatever she is holding and she turns and looks at me, and we have the conversation we have had, in varying forms, every morning for 3 years, which is no particular conversation, the ordinary unremarkable traffic of a morning between 2 people who have decided to inhabit the same life. I used to think that inhabiting was something that happened to you, that a house was inhabited or it wasn't, and you could not make it so by trying. I understand now that it is a choice made repeatedly, in small increments, by two people willing to keep making it. She is willing. I am at last a man worth being willing for. This is the most I could have asked at the end. That it should be true, and that I should know it, and that every morning she should turn from the cutting border and look at me with those steady eyes that have always seen everything I was too defended to show, and that I should meet them at last without flinching. Ravenshallow is warm. She is in it. That is the whole of the accounting, and it is enough.